welcome back to StudyOnion. And today we're going to be talking about the exploration of the moon, the internal structure of the moon in comparison to the Earth, and some objectives of the Apollo mission, as well as the appearance of the far side of the moon. But for now, let's get started! So the first thing that we need to be talking about is the differences in appearance between the internal structure of the moon in comparison to the internal structure of the Earth. Now, if we look at these two diagrams, we can see some slight differences. These are not to scale, and they have been enlarged so they appear almost the same size. Obviously, we know that the moon and the Earth are not the same size. So there are some notable differences between the Earth and the Moon. Firstly, the mean thickness of the lunar crust is 50 to 60 kilometers, which is 3 times that of the Earth's crust. But the thickness of the lunar crust on the far side is 160 kilometers, and this may explain why Lunar Maria are almost exclusively found on the Moon's near side, which has a thinner crust. Another key difference is that the radius of the moon's core is less than 25% of the total radius of the moon. And finally, the moon's core is offset by around 2 kilometers towards the near side, or in other words, towards the Earth. So let's have a little look at the appearance of the far side of the moon. So, as we can see from this image, the far side of the moon looks drastically different to the near side. So initially, we could never see the far side of the moon because the moon is tidally locked to the Earth. But when the unmanned Soviet spacecraft Luna 3 flew around the far side of the moon, fitted with a dual-lens camera which took several photographs of the far side on board, the film was then processed on board, scanned, and then transmitted back to the Earth, and this showed a lack of Lunar Maria and a presence of cratered highlands, which was highly unexpected at the time. Now, let's have a little look at the objectives of the manned mission to the moon, Apollo. True objectives of the Apollo mission include, firstly, satisfying the requirements of Kennedy's historic speech, where he announced the Apollo space program, which involved landing men on the moon and returning them safely back to the Earth. The collection of lunar rocks and soil for analysis on return to the Earth. And for the deployment of scientific experiments on the lunar surface. So these included laser-ranging retroreflectors, passive seismometers to measure moonquakes, lunar dust collectors, and solar wind composition experiments. Okay, so let's have a little look at a practice question. Compare the similarities and differences in the internal structure of the moon versus the internal structure of the Earth. So I'll just give you a couple seconds to have a go at this question. This would be typically around a 4-mark question, so you're looking at making 4 points. I'm just going to mention here that I don't think that they would have to be evenly spread out. So you are allowed to say 1 similarity and 3 differences, or vice versa, as long as you've mentioned at least 1 similarity and 1 difference. So I'll just give you about 10 seconds to have a quick look at the question and write your own answer down, and then we'll go through my answer. Okay, so pause the video if you want a little bit longer to have a go at the question. But let's just have a little look at my answer. So I've mentioned 1 similarity here, that they both possess the same internal structures. And I've mentioned, for example, crust, mantle, core. And that would both all give you 1 mark, and that would tick off your similarity box. I've then mentioned 3 differences. So these are the differences that were on the previous slide. I'm just going to read them out. The mean thickness of the lunar crust is 50 to 60 kilometers, which is 3 times of the Earth's crust, but the thickness of the lunar crust on the far side is 160 kilometers. The radius of the moon's core is less than 25% of the moon's radius in comparison to the Earth, where the Earth's core takes up more than 50% of the Earth's radius. And finally, the moon's core is offset by 2 kilometers towards the near side, or towards the Earth, unlike the Earth's core, which happens to be at the physical centre of the Earth. So, to summarise, although the moon has a crust, mantle, and core, inner and outer, like the Earth, there are some notable differences. The mean thickness of the lunar crust is 50 to 60 kilometers, which is typically 3 times that of the Earth's crust. And the thickness in lunar highlands can be up to 160 kilometers. The radius of the moon's core is 25% less than that of the moon's radius. On Earth, the core extends to more than 50% of its radius. And the moon's core is not at the physical centre of the moon, but is offset by about 2 kilometres towards the near side, i.e. towards the Earth. Prior to 1959, the appearance of the moon's far side was unknown. The unmanned Soviet spacecraft Lunar 3 flew around the far side of the moon and was able to take several photographs of the far side, which was transmitted back to the Earth once Lunar 3 was close enough. These images depicted the highly cratered highlands on the far side, as well as the lack of mare on the far side. In May 1961, US President John F. Kennedy made a historic speech to the joint session of Congress, which he announced the ambitious Apollo space program, which consisted of landing men on the moon and returning them safely back to the Earth before this decade is out, i.e. the 1960s was over. Other objectives of the Apollo space program also included the collection of lunar soil and rocks for analysis on return to the Earth, then the deployment of scientific experiments on the lunar surface, including laser-ranging retroreflectors, passive seismometers, lunar dust collectors, and solar wind composition experiments. On 2:56 GMT on July 21st, 1969, Neil Armstrong was the first of a total of 12 astronauts to step onto the moon's surface. Project Apollo did continue after these moon landings, but failed to attract as much public interest as the manned landings on the moon. So there you have it. That is it for exploring the moon. I'll see you again next week with a new video on origins of the moon. But for now, bye!